You are live, and let me check.
We are. It is March 26th, Wednesday. We are here with the Agency of Transportation to talk about public transit. And if you could name and title, we're ready to go.
Well, thank you. I'm Ross McDonald. I'm Public Transit Program Manager for VTrans. I've been with the agency for 18 years and been the program manager for 5. And
Jim Moulton is on Zoom.
Yep.
So you know.
Good morning. Jim Moulton. I am the Executive Director of Tri-Valley Transit and also the Chair of the Board of Directors for Vermont Public Transportation Association. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Here. No. Okay. I'm not sure why this is. Okay. Well, thank you. And it's nice to be in front of this committee. We do have a presentation to talk about the budget and our granting plan. So we really are going to spend some time talking about the difference as we try to align our granting plan with our budget with different time schedules. But very quickly, again, to remind the committee here that about 65% of our funds come from non-FTA dollars. Many rural programs use their FTA formula funds and maybe a little bit of state, and that's the program. If that was the case in Vermont, we'd have maybe a $13 or $15 million program, but we have over a $50 million program because we pull in about $23 million from our FHWA funds. We pull in about $10 million from state, and then we work with the locals to come up with our providers, come up with the local funds to meet what we need to do for the forthcoming for the state fiscal year. As a result, we have a lot of services that a lot of rural states don't have. We have a lot of fixed route services along our major trunks, deviated fixed routes. Our older adults and persons with disability program is a demand response dial-a-ride program that is combined or braided with the Medicaid program, demand response program. We do support intercity services, and we have a TDM or Transportation Demand Management Program called Go Vermont, which is all the ways to get around without a single occupancy vehicle. And we have the Mobility and Transportation Innovation Grant Program that was stood up just a few years ago with the House. So all told, that's our program. And the ridership is returned. We're still about 9% under pre-COVID levels, primarily because of commuter routes. Those are about 30% under COVID levels. And we have some data to show you regarding the performance of our routes here. And unfortunately, that does conclude most of the good news of the day, because we are looking at a financial reality here of increased costs. If we look at costs per trip in 2021 in COVID, ridership was really nowhere to be found. We maintained services using COVID 100% federal dollars. That saved state dollars. It also saved our local funds for a few years. And last year at this time, looking at 2023's route performance report, we went from 1496 to 1403, and we were hoping that it would continue to bend down a little bit. But what happened was that it increased by 13%. And so that's the reality we're facing. In 2019, pre-COVID, the state, including the Medicaid program to operate those services, it's about $49 million, and that's now $68 million. In this time, the overall budget has moved from $36 million for public transit to $53 million in 5 years' time. So we're trying to catch up to these escalating costs, and that's where we are right now.
So what, you said it was, I think, 13%. What was that? That was the operating cost, or that's, I thought you were talking about the cost per trip. That's
So
19
the operating cost went up 13% from 23 to 24. And so 59,
52 cents is not 13%.
no, 59 to 68 million.
I'm sorry. Number.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. And so that includes the Medicaid demand response services as well.
And is that why the cost per trip has gone up so much since 2019?
Yes. And we also have other, upward costs on insurances, vehicle and personal, of course, health insurance. And, the wages increases of admin, preventive maintenance has been a real challenge to meet. But costs per trip by service category, are pretty alarming. Demand response is most notable. Micro transit is now in 6 regions.
Because the trips are longer.
It's because of the reduction in volunteer drivers providing those services. That's the best way to provide a 57.5-cent mile.
Why is that more expensive than the other one? Because none of the other ones have volunteer drivers.
Well, because commuter cost per trip, 30% decrease with the same amount of commuter services. That's a big increase for commuter services. Micro transit is a new category this year. But let's take a look at cost per trip versus 2019 levels. So pre-COVID demand response was about $24. And so, we got to really build up more volunteers to bend that cost curve down. Well, we can see that it is a 105% increase. I just have these numbers listed here. The other one is the commuter services, another 104.9% increase since then. We look at the rural and the rural is up 16.3%.
What would be really helpful on these sheets is if someplace there was a definition of each, so we could delineate between what's rural versus small town, micro transit, what it is, because most people, if anybody's listening to this, other than the people that are professionals and those of us that don't deal with it, you need definitions.
Yeah,
And trip, is it a trip per person, per rider?
cost per trip. Yep,
But a trip per rider, not just a trip.
correct.
Okay, so that
So-
makes a difference.
Cost-
So when you have fewer riders,
Right. That's why DR is expensive.
So we're still 9% underneath, and DR is expensive, because yes, if we're not having those volunteers making those long trips and we're putting those on a cutaway with a professional CDL driver, that really makes it from a 67.5 cents a mile calculation to $118 an hour. And if we're out there 4 or 5 hours to get somebody to Dartmouth Hitchcock from, Newport.
Even if it wasn't a volunteer driver, it's just one passenger.
That's right.
It's gonna be expensive.
And it's round trip, so it's about $100 to get somebody to and from their doctor's appointments, essential shopping, those types of things.
yeah. Can I just, and in our area, sometimes we take people to Boston.
Yeah.
That's also the service that we get other revenue for too.
That's unchanged from 2019, when we go to Boston and Albany. A good example would be the Vermont Association of Blind and Visually Impaired. We provide them $150,000 a year annually so that they can use their own volunteer network to make those long trips and to take a little bit of pressure off our cutaways fleet. Intercity is the really only bright spot here from 2019. In 2019, we had intercity routes that were going from Albany to Manchester and back. That was combined with Route 7, which is really performing well. And we're also doing a Rutland to White River Junction trip, and that ridership just never materialized. $100 a trip type scenario. And so post
I didn't even
COVID,
know that was a thing. And that might be why it didn't materialize.
People want to go away.
No, they don't know, but it takes 3 years to get
our
something. to see how everything is going to work.
That was in place for 3 years. And what we found, and this isn't going to surprise anybody, is that folks on the western side of the state generally look to New England for inner city access, for areas of dominant influence. And the folks over on the other side are coming over to the Albany area. And so with Route 7, that is really performing well. Even when we started the Ethan Allen up and moving up and down all the way through Burlington, we maintained and grew that ridership on the bus. We changed the schedule so that they were complementary, not running side by side. And now you've got a lot of options coming from that eastern corridor.
But I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. I think to Senator Harrison's point, I am pretty tuned into the public transportation space as an individual, as a layperson, and I was not aware. And then, that we had a White River Junction to Rutland bus, and I've certainly attempted to take that trip. So I guess I'm wondering I think that the statement that they're not performing or not making enough money has a lot to do with, are people aware of this service? And if it's an actual viable alternative that they even know about,
Sure.
rather than if it would be profitable because there isn't demand for it or need for it. Because there are many, many people in my district and reverse who go to work at Dartmouth, who drop off in White River Junction would be ideal to connect to advanced transit, or go to Rutland. I mean, there's a lot of traffic that goes over the hill in that regard. So it's surprising to me, because I hear that as a need from constituents. So it's surprising to me to hear that this was not something that I knew about, and B, that it is underperforming, I think is not due to the fact that there is not a need for it, but rather that service has not become apparent to people who would be eligible for its use.
In 2015-16, when we developed these routes, Premier Coach or Vermont Trans Lines received the award for Route 4 and Route 7. They're performing very well along Route 7. Route 4, after the first year, wasn't working. We spent about $30,000 on outreach up and down the Front Porch Forum corridor, hitting each one of those communities up and down. I rode the bus with pamphlets and would run out at each bus stop, and talk to Premier Coach about different areas along that route that we could go. We went to each town hall and put a trifold together. We really try, and we have the Go Vermont program, which includes marketing dollars. And we're successful in Route 7. We were not really successful with Route 4. And we did work with Premier Coach. We tried, before we cut any routes, we don't just say this is underperforming, it's got to be cut. This is underperforming. What can we do? What's happened? Who else can assist us? And so this is not unusual for us. It's not unusual to start a route after we have 112 routes that are covering the most obvious, routes and corridors and job access. When we start a new route, we're hoping that it's going to be successful, but they are not always successful. What we found is that people can get to the same intercity bus network in Albany in a shorter run. That with those options on that side of the state, then to come over to White River Junction, transfer, and then get to Springfield to get to that same intercity network. So, that's something that we can talk about, and we'll be looking at the other underperforming routes just in a few slides here and talk about, what we do on an annual basis. But when we look at these performances, we don't have a hard line with any route saying this one is underperforming, it's gone, it's underperforming. What can we do? Front Porch Forum.
We don't use Front Porch Forum in our area. I mean,
You've got the 36 town listserv, and we did use that one as well through Upper Valley PMN.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because even listing that as like a go-to place for outreach, it just is not a thing in our community. Like, people do not use Front Porch Forum in the Upper Valley.
No.
We use the listserv. So I appreciate that. And I guess I'm just a little surprised. I understand your point around $30,000 in outreach. It seems, I guess I'd like to understand more the definition of underperforming over time. And this slide is not available in your presentation on, so I apologize, I can't see it, and I'm wondering if.
I need to resend this. This was done last night at 9:12. When I was looking at the slides, like, gosh, looking at these other ones, and you can tell it's kind of cobbled together last night without, my professional folks working on it. But we felt I just wanted to insert this to show a little bit of the difference where we are in just 5 years' time.
What's tourism?
Tourism would be Mount Snow, Killington, the Burke,
So the ski areas.
mostly ski areas.
And that's the cost, not the revenues. That's not the net cost. That's the,
Cost per trip,
just on the,
using federal, non-federal dollars.
right, but not, there's no revenue in there. Is that
Well,
accurate?
revenue is in the budget, but
Right, no, I understand, but when you say cost, it's
Mm-hmm.
just what you're spending. It's not what you're
The
receiving
gross,
to
not the
offset.
net.
right.
Yeah.
And we can certainly look and ensure that we generally try to get 20% from the resorts to support at least, and we have some that are supported far more than that in our tourism piece. Stowe Mountain Road comes to mind where they're at like 29%. And they've even helped us buy some vehicles, so they've been a really good partner.
Go ahead.
Ross, do you have the microtransit costs per trip broken down by the different microtransit? Assume
What
that's the
is the
average.
microtransit?
Yes.
It would be nice, as I go back to, I can't tell the difference between inner city and urban.
Mhm.
I can't tell so it would be nice to have definitions of each to get the differentiation between each.
Sure. Urban, Chittenden County, Burlington is that urban. Small town are generally the circulator routes that Morrisville had before microtransit. Morrisville then moved from serving a route to serving a region with a vehicle. And so using a dial a ride program or an app, you can call the bus in. And so rather than hoping that we're getting the origin and destination correct, you tell us when to come and get you. We can get you closer to where you live, and maybe get you closer to where you want to go with this microtransit service. And I do have a slide to show the performance of each microtransit
Okay.
pilot.
Good.
The tourism is what we just talked about. Demand response is dial a ride for our older persons
Is
with
that
disabilities.
medical rights, the dial-a-ride?
Yes, sir. The commuter trips are really looking to morning and afternoon, maybe a midday run, getting to job centers for employment services. Those are longer distances. It's also the one that is 30% under pre-COVID overall, 9%. That's really pulling down some of our
So
performance.
in the dial-a-ride, do you get anything through Medicaid or how is that funded?
Sure. Dial a Ride is funded through two ways. The Department of Vermont Health Access that manages the Medicaid non-emergency medical transportation trips. That is done through a contract with the Vermont Public Transit Association. Jim Moulton is the president of that organization. Caleb is a member, of course. And our own $5 to $6 million for the older adults and persons with disability that are not Medicaid eligible. We start with Medicaid and then elderly and people with disability. And then a few years ago, we added another line item for recovery and job access. We were hearing from the Opioid Council that I sat on that access to services that are not being met through the NEMT program, Medicaid program, or O&D program, older and persons with disability program, was really affecting recovery. We also bundled that with an opportunity to provide people with a week or two of commute service to get them to and from a job opportunity so that they can fix their car, get a carpool, join a van pool, whatever it needs to do. We wanted to provide access to a new job opportunity, working with that client to see if they could sustain their commute once we get them up and running with this new job opportunity. Van pools, we have over 20 now. Van pools running around with 6 or more people. That's a really nice cost option if we're going to look at commuter services costing $60, $61 a person to get them to and from work. If we can ask them to participate in a van pool, well, that becomes $15 a day to get them to and from work. And many times it's coworkers getting to and from work exactly when they want to get there, not when the bus thinks they need to get there. So we hope that we can continue to expand that. We can put 10 van pools on the road for the cost of one public transit route.
Why don't you have 19 days for that? Van pooling has been around for a while.
Yeah, that is a mistake from last night. This is a new category that now that we have more than 12, 14, 15 is becoming more important to our budget. And so this is a new thing. That 741 should be blue.
Okay.
That is 2020.
That's fine.
I mean, actually, that is 2024. We don't have the blue from 2019. I didn't have those numbers last night,
So we haven't something.
but oh yes, absolutely.
Are you about to change on?
Yes.
Or so commuter versus intercity?
Yep.
Can you explain that?
Intercity is our long distances going from major hubs to connect to the interstate national bus system. So intercity, it gets you to Boston to Montreal. We pay for a portion of that leg with Flix and Greyhound. We pay Premier Coach, Vermont Translines, to connect Burlington along the corridor down to Albany. And airports and train stations and bus stations are absolutely, the places that people are going and originating in on those routes.
Interesting, because we used to have that in Brattleboro, but we don't anymore. So it's helpful for me to know that we do have it elsewhere. So commuters, would that be the Burlington to Montpelier?
Yes.
Service? So that one, I understand it was much more popular and then COVID happened. And so not as many, people are working from home. So we don't have as many folks on that. But just the way that this is done, the total cost of the service may actually be the same. It's just we have half the people riding. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that the case?
Correct.
Okay.
So every year when we do these route performance reports, our consultant looks at those routes that are 150% more than the average and 66% less than the average on a cost per trip basis.
Say that one more time.
Per person.
Per trip, per route, we look at the average trip per cost. And then we set that against all the rural routes, all the commuter routes, all the tourism routes around the state. Then we take a look and say, which one of these routes are over 150% more expensive than the average? And say, wow, that would identify and a starting point to talk about an underperforming route. If you are 66% less expensive than the average, then you are deemed a very successful route. And then anything in between 66% and 150% is acceptable.
I don't know. Are you going to show these?
I can. I have a smattering of that. I didn't know. It takes about an hour to go through the route performance report. We've got to go through the budget as well, but we do have some time.
I'm sure you'll be back.
And
You're gonna be back.
okay, then absolutely. At the House Transportation Committee, we did spend about an hour on the route performance report. So we start when it's like an audit, like you go through it and say, where are the salient points and the touch points or the action areas. And we start with the underperforming routes. And we'll have 5, 7, 10, 2, depending on the year. And we talk to the providers. And an example would be in the middle where we look at TVT 89er service. It says 1 year underperforming, but there's a 9 next to it. For 9 years, we have been trying different iterations of the 89er running into Dartmouth area and Hanover from 89, Route 89, of course, from Randolph. And we've never found the ridership. And working with Jim Moulton at TVT and his managers, what more can we do? And so it's an example of, just not saying you're underperforming, we're going to cut you. It's like, hey, this is underperforming. What can we do? And sometimes it's actually adding more money to add another leg for more service in the past, but generally it's more marketing, more outreach, and also acknowledgement that, yeah, that's really not generating the demand that we originally thought it would be. So running down this route program, we can say with SEBT, the Brattleboro Blue Line, it's been underperforming for 2 years, but it's up 22% in FY25. And talking with the board and the managers, they say, well, that blue line, that first route, we really have like 2 people on it at 6:30 in the morning. We think we can probably do without that, reduce the miles and hours on that route. That's what we talk about all the way down the list. And, Caleb's here just to talk about the one underperforming route with the Crown Connection. That was a bus with bike trailer to help with the congestion at Burke Mountain or Kingdom Trails. And this was done right around when we were seeing so much activity and those parking lots were full. Things have changed since COVID, and we don't have those full parking lots, and the ridership hasn't materialized. We didn't say after the first year, and it was $123 a trip, which is really, alarming. We need to cut it. Caleb and RCT went out and did more outreach, really great rebranding job, and we're still not there. So they're willing to let that go because the need has changed and the demand's changed, and to spend those dollars is a tough return on investment to justify. As we're going through the route performance report, we're saying, hey, what about the US 2 commuter? That one is really pretty expensive too. Is there a way to go from 2 runs in the morning to 2 runs in the afternoon? And RCT is now looking at, yeah, we only have 2 people on the early morning run. Maybe that makes sense. This is what I'm mentioning that we do every year, is we're always tightening and looking for opportunities. And then for 5 years since I've been here, and for 18 years since I've been part of the program, we've been able to be talking about more funds, microtransit, recovery and job advocates, the transit app, and the technology to get everybody to know when their vehicle is coming. Our electric buses, $37 million for those, using COVID funds to save local funds. It's really been an enjoyable, nice experience to testify because we've had so much good news. This year, it's more of a reset and asking folks to let these programs and projects that we just that I just mentioned play out, as well as seeing where we are with these 13 underperforming groups is quite a few in historical terms. And so these will not all be cut. Some of them will not be cut at all. Middlebury is part of a pilot of a microtransit overlay. And so when 24 wasn't in the acceptable threshold, they go, well, we can't make changes now because we're still part of this microtransit pilot.
How many are already gone?
Jeffersonville commuter is already gone. And that's the only, and the Brown route has been absorbed into other advanced transit routes. And so they now have, different set where they took the Brown route and moved it into, combining other routes. And so that's not unusual either. It's how can we provide that mobility or that connectivity? Is it expanding this route or combining these hours? Those types of things happen. So right now, as I look through this, the Jeffersonville commuter is the only one that has been cut, and that was done at beginning of this calendar year.
So the blue line, are you saying it's just one of the service? It's just one of the links or whatever.
Yeah, like one good
Yeah,
run.
so it's not the whole service.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, so the blue line is a relatively new line. It serves it serves residents and helps kids get to the public pool. But then it also serves a place called Winston Crowdy, which is slated for development of 300 units eventually. And that one of my concerns about the way that Act 250 has been changed is that Act 250 permits that include transit, we don't yet have a good way of letting, or I don't think you do. Do you know that that's slated to be a development and needs to have transit?
Well, so the Act 250 process includes a Vermont transportation review.
Exactly.
And that review is done by Christopher Clow and Dan Courier, a former planner at the Regional Planning Commission here. He works with that committee to ensure that their design can accommodate transit, that the existing transit may need to include a bus stop, that they, are going to be putting a lot of folks in a location that will likely need transit. What are we going to do about that? We do not have the teeth to require, we think this is going to require this many trips, need this much money from you. But we do have an advisory
Actually, you
consultation role.
But
no, that
my understanding,
public
Act
transit
250
in our role.
does have
Yes,
the authority.
yes.
But when towns are doing Act 250, they don't have that authority yet. And there's a study coming up on that. And I hope that we take that seriously and make sure that towns have that authority, because that's really important to the system. So when you looked at the blue line, was there anything in your files that said, hey, this is, actually, they don't have their Act 250 permit yet.
Right. So
How do you know
I really,
that an existing route includes that kind of requirement, or at least benefit?
we have rural planning or regional planning commissions on our boards, and Chris Campany would, be in that area. We also have the town manager on that board. And we have the regional provider that is responsible for the mobility options and services in their region. So we largely defer. When we do comment on a project, we send that to the provider in that region and saying, hey, we want to put this on your radar. Oh, yeah, we already heard about that. Or thank you very much. This is our impacts. Please, be mindful of these.
Yeah, the question is, that's good to know. If you don't have a planner on the board and the board doesn't let you know that that route is important for that purpose, and you're considering reducing that route, do you have a mechanism to know that?
So Randy is aware of that if it's been reviewed by VTrans, because whenever we comment or we see a project, we respond to Chris, our VTrans Act 250 person, and send the copy of that email to the providers for their awareness.
Yeah, I think your process for new development is good and does have all the checks, so that you know what needs to be done, the provider knows. But when you're reducing routes, that's my concern, because we could have a development that is dependent on transit, have maybe there's a blip one year and you want to get rid of it. I don't know that VTrans would know that it's essential to that project in the future.
At that point, I'm expecting that the RPCs, and we work with them just outside the boards as well. We have a program with them, and we are wondering how best to work with them on these items. But I can say that we are responsive to those developments. And if the blue line cut the morning route with 2 people on them, say, oh, wait, now with this new development, we expect an extra 15 people, then we put that in.
Okay,
so we make adjustments we try to ask our providers to reconsider and make adjustments to all of their routes, depending on all of these demands, developments, history, opportunities, new businesses providing additional funding and support, changing their hours to accommodate the bus route. Those things happen,
Right, so you rely on the provider to tell you that.
as well as our Act 250 on the larger projects.
All right.
And our acknowledgement.
All right, so that is something that we need to fix before towns get Act 50 authority.
So when we see a press release saying V-Trans seeks $1.5 million in savings, what we really should say is V-Trans seeks up to $1.5 million in savings on underperforming routes and underperforming aspects of performing routes. We are not in a position at this point of making route changes based on budget pressures. It's more about metrics right now as part of a three-pronged plan to get to this post-COVID, post-inflation number that I can bring to the budget committee for 27. So 26 is really a reset and a continuation of the projects that I mentioned. We're going to work hard on these underperforming services. And in the granting plan and the June Public Transit Advisory Council meeting, we'll see the budget, the requested funds per line item, and then the awards. Did we get 82% of operations, 98% of state funds? And we provided that last year for the first time. It's something that, we plan to share immediately, even before the grants are signed. We can show our initial award intentions at that time. So the budget process in September for 27, I will be looking at, this 26 initial awards, but I won't have 25's reconciliation yet. I won't have the route performance report yet because that requires a National Transit Database process in October through November. And we use that to combine that data for our route performance report. And then we are here talking about the program budgeted that we presented in August, September. Meanwhile, we have about 2 months before we put out the granting plan. And every year when we issue the grant documents, we provide guidance. We notice a lot of non-vehicle capital programs are being extended. Please clean those up. Please take a look at your cutaways. We have some good options over here. Let's take a look at our underperforming routes this year. What can we do for better coordination? Those types of things. This year, we didn't have so many opportunities like recovering job access. We don't have a new program like that. We don't have new micro transit program on the books here. This is the reset year. My first year where we haven't said, hey, what else can we do? We're doing a lot. Let's see where this leads to. In late April, we'll receive their grant applications. And so we're working with our providers to through their creation of their applications. And then May through June is a very busy time for us because we look at all their awards and say, okay, ops or admin, preventive maintenance, vehicles, facilities, demand response, CMAC, can we use some of your PM funds to cover some of your admin needs? Instead of 5 vehicles, can we get away with 3 and can we buy 2 used vehicles? Those types of things with each provider. And there's about a 2 or 3 iteration process where we provide initial awards, the feedback, the revised initial awards, and that's how it's been done for over 20 years. And then that informs the next year's budget. And that's where we are right now. I wanted to just take some time and spend to note the difference in timing and the difference in kind of expectations.
Yeah, so expectations, this is my first year on this committee. I would have thought that you would have given your budget to the House when they had the C-bill.
Yeah, this is, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, this is the 2027.
This is 2026 budget presentation. And when we talked about the budget, I never really talked about the granting process that we have, which it ties in with the budget. And so the budget process, we presented 26 in September. Takes a while to get it in the white book. Then by the time I'm here in January, I've gotten a lot more information, reconciliations from the previous year, group performance reports, information from the first quarter of that particular year, those types of dynamics. And so now with that budget that's been presented, I'm like, okay, it's time to put out these funds. What are we seeing and what guidance do we want to work with the providers to primarily sustain services and look for opportunities to save money and to improve services?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was on the committee a while back.
Yeah, so did
So
you hear about?
so what is
cuts?
confusing to me is, so if I'm understanding your budgetary process, you know the amount of money you have. And you go through all of this budget process. And then you inform folks. So it's not based on what the public transit providers need. And that's how you set and ask for a budget. It's you have a budget and then you go and say, this is what we need.
Almost. And if I may, what we look at is what we just awarded for that. For 26, we'll say this is what we just awarded. For 27, what are we going to need to sustain services? What are we going to need for capital for our vehicles and those things? And that is working with our providers. Where do you see what we need for 27?
Okay.
And so we do look at that and we roll that up. And that's why we don't just stay at $36 million. We've gotten to 53. And the budget committee is like, what are you doing to control costs? That's what we're doing now in this reset, so that I'm in September of this year talking about 27's budget and saying we've supported GMQ's $1.5 million in savings, which or route adjustments, evenings, weekends, summer hours mostly. We've worked with our providers to find savings mostly through underperforming routes. We are proceeding with a transfer of rural services that could save us $500,000 to $1 million. That's due diligence. The new number is not 53 million, it is X. And I don't know what that is yet because we're still working on the granting claim to see what X is going to be to start this fiscal year and then work again on the projection. So the budget is just a plan. And then the granting plan is the actuals.
Okay.
And then we start the process all over again.
So where did the legislatures weigh in on this plan? What is the appropriate time? Because I think I'll speak for myself, but I do think it's a little backwards the way that it happens. I mean, I think that the providers of services should be able to, I don't like the way that we do that budget based on your description, because I think it puts providers in a competitive space against each other in some ways, which is the least ideal situation for our individual communities. So how do we weigh in and give you guidance to say because I think it becomes this almost like foregone conclusion when it gets to us that, oh yeah, we have to cut things. And I actually don't know if that's true. I actually think that we have some very strong public transportation advocates in the room and in the building at large who would say, if we're seeing a 41% increase for paving, it makes complete sense why we might see a 41% increase for public transportation. And that's greater than the $36 to $53 million you're talking about. So I'm wondering, how do we engage with your budget setting process? Because it sounds like it's kind of a foregone conclusion at this point.
Sure.
No, that's a good
And
question.
if
Because these are 26 numbers that I've been receiving, cuts for 26, not 27.
From 2019 to 2025, we have seen a 59.38% increase in the overall budget. So paving 41%. And, here we are in the program, with us, it's 59.38 that we've received in addition. And when we look at underperforming services, and some of these routes are costing us, $150 to get somebody to and from work each day. that's a tough return on investment. Yeah, even though we have transit advocates, are there other ways and other activities to use those funds for? When we had those Link Express buses going 5-6 times in the morning, in the afternoon. And that's been reduced to 7 times during the morning, during the afternoon, and one in the midday, only to adjust for the demand. And so we wouldn't want to just keep empty buses running, especially when we are starting a new start, because we never know if it's going to be successful.
So, go back. So can I just ask, how do we engage?
Thank you.
I totally hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I hear what you're trying to describe, and I realize, Mr. McDonald, you've always been in a very difficult position. Where you are balancing the relationship between the agency of transportation and the kind of the bandwidth that you're given, compared to what you're being asked for by your provider. So I completely understand you're kind of in the middle, but how would we advocate?
Right now, in the last 3 years, you've looked at the budget. We've indicated what was going to happen. And the legislature has determined $1 million extra for GMT Urban, 630 something $1,000 last year for GMT Urban. This year in the granting plan, if we mention we're going to focus on these underperforming routes and try to reset, and the legislature is saying, oh, wait, we want 10 more microtransit programs.
Yeah,
What would that look like? Then that would change the budget process
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
For us. It's true, I don't set the budget, but I contribute to it, and we're getting given targets. I've never really hit them. I'm always like over the target, but it's human service. It's a program of services and not a program of projects. And so we, generally are successful in convincing our budget committee how best to invest in an improved transit system. This year, we're trying to use those increased dollars to find this post-COVID, post-inflation, new level of services and build again on that foundation as we reset post-COVID numbers and costs. So this is the process right now.
okay, so if you are going to be cut, so what I understand is there are going to be reductions in service. So as I assume these things right here. So this is already decided, is kind of what I, okay,
No, I'm sorry.
okay. But you've identified these things.
Mhm.
And there might be more cuts potentially. So what is our engagement with that? What is I guess I'm confused because I know that you really can't advocate to have an ask for us, but let's, in a hypothetical world, when would you make that ask? And how would we know what that ask is? In case, let's say someone on the committee really cared about this issue and didn't want to see the cuts.
Sure. Well, again, the cuts is ongoing, and we really haven't had any issues with the boards or with the legislature because out of our 112 routes, these are really costing us a lot of money. And are there ways to maintain these connectivities these aren't total route cuts. They're one leg of a route cut. They're the last.
The Jeffersonville route was a total cut.
Absolutely. And Westover.
I think I understand that.
73, right, dollars per trip. And
I don't need it explained. It would have been nice if you called some of the local legislators before. It did get there.
I understand, and we are part of the process, and we do participate in those public meetings. But those announcements generally come from the providers, and we are there to be responsible for that. So that's the difference between budget and the granting plan. And next year, let's say they say, hey, that's 53 million hypothetical. That to sustain businesses or to sustain services that are performing, I need 57. And they go, hey, you got 53. You will see that in the presentation where we say, hey, now we have to make cuts because we don't have the budget to sustain our successful routes. I'm not saying that this year. This year, and we'll talk about challenges in just a little bit. we're finding ourselves upside down on our fleet needs and our capital needs because we were unsuccessful in getting a slug of competitive FTA funds last year to move our percentage of poor vehicles in our fleet from 30 to 20. 20 is our goal. We have 20% spare ratio. Those should be not new shiny vehicles. So when we look at these adjustments, we expect that reduction in service and hours could also take some pressure off our fleet while we wait for the 5339 bus and bus facility competitive program to be announced this year. This is the latest it's ever been announced. If it's not announced, that is really going to affect, our plans in the future, not 26 so much, but in future years, as it takes about a year to obligate the funds, go through the procurement and set up delivery dates. And so we've got some real issues. But if they announce that NOFA or notice a funding opportunity for 5339 and we're successful, well, then that issue has been dealt with. So we're always looking at, a series of issues, whether it's CDL drivers, which was several years ago, maintenance folks, capital, and then operations. But certainly operations is the most important aspect of what we do.
Okay.
So one more, and then we're gonna break in and do those two amendments. We're gonna take a 5-minute break and then we're gonna come back into this. Okay.
So speaking of, you're hinting at the federal picture and the money coming their way. We need to be having that conversation this year. Because what I'm worried about, and I understand you're saying, I'm only cutting underperforming services. Don't necessarily totally agree with your underperforming definition, in my view. But that's me personally. So I understand what you're saying. I think we are going to have to potentially cut successful or performing routes next year. And I think that's because of where we're seeing expectations with the AOT budget and what they presented for other things. So I think we're already at that place where that's a conversation we need to have. And then the federal picture, we need to be putting money this year to stave off that risk for next year.
Yeah.
I think that's an active conversation we have to have. So I do hope we can talk about that because I do not want to be in this room next year where we're not just talking about underperforming routes, but we're talking about major routes that get people that are very much considered well-performing. So I'm very concerned about that. And I hope we have time to have that conversation this year, because if we don't have that conversation this year, we're going to have a much worse conversation next year.
I would say that, and we're gonna take a break, and like Damien, we're gonna do the two small amendments. What we're seeing in the overall is the hemorrhaging of transportation across the board. And there is, the decisions that you're headed toward, that you're bringing to us. If we had more transportation dollars in the overall pie, we could move money into this area, but it's virtually impossible to find other areas to move money away from. And would you move in that level? So
Raise revenue.
I keep raising the issue, and I raised it last night in the chairs meeting, the difficulty that we're having. So at some point in the leadership of the overall body, I keep saying this, that when we bump up against the education fund, the general fund, and we're redoing the shaping of formulas in education, and we're talking about the relationship between everybody, that we should be talking about where transportation is, because I try to keep making it very clear to the leadership. And I said this last night at the chairs meeting. I don't know how to put together a budget next January.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah.
And I think it's incumbent upon us as a committee to figure out how we can articulate that in the President Pro Tem's office. I'm gonna, and we're gonna come back to it. We haven't talked about it, and we're gonna have to spend some time in it. I've got, a number of hospitals across the state that are in huge deficit. There's almost an $11 million deficit at Gifford and Randolph. We've got, Brattleboro is at a $5 million deficit. If they start cutting services, the backup for someone in Newport or in places like that is your DR.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna wanna hear how how it's funded, and we need to understand the base of where that is and what it would take to ramp that up. Because if they close services in Randolph, the only opportunity for somebody that is on SSI or SSDI and very low is that program. And the demand on that program will go through the roof. And I don't think we're ready for it. So that's just, and all of this, the backdrop is our underperforming revenues in transportation. And I clearly, when I say it in the chairs meeting and amongst our group, I don't know how to put together a budget next year. And
Yeah, so we can talk about this more. I mean, there's multiple suggestions for
there's
revenue.
multiple suggestions and all of that, but I'm
Transportation.
trying in the overall, the high level umbrella. And I am trying to raise the issue.
I'm glad you are raising it. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I-
you had a great article too on it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
started with articles and but in the chairs meeting last night,
Yeah.
I took more of the time than anybody else because I think it highlights the difficulty we're having across the board.
Yeah.
So if you could give us a chance to, and then we're gonna take 5 minutes, then you're gonna be spending some time here.
Yay, gonna hang out with Rob.
So would you?
Don't hear that.
It'll be good. We care. And
Oh, are we taking a break?
No, we're gonna
Oh,
do these
okay.
2 small amendments, that we explained to you, but shouldn't take very long. Just get those so at 1 o'clock, they're off the table. Could you move, please? You can leave your stuff there.
Okay, you stop sharing.
I'll be.
I can take that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll be quick.
Yeah, this is really not any more than what we talked about.
Okay, so I think you all have the amendment in front of you.
Yep.
1.
cool.
2.1. And so, Mr. Chair, I listed you as the sponsor. I hope that's okay. I can always change that.
You get all the credit.
Yeah, I would think that if we all agree to this, it's the whole committee.
I can update it and give you a
Yep.
draft. Or an updated version of the draft with the whole committee. So the first instance of amendment goes into the EV infrastructure fee waiver that we created for municipalities, the state, and for fire and rescue, volunteer fire and rescue organizations. This would modify the subdivision that relates to municipalities to add the words county or in front of municipality throughout. So this would extend it to county vehicles, which I believe is primarily going to be the sheriff's department, but maybe some other vehicles as well. And municipal vehicles are already covered, so.
Vehicles, could it be the side judges?
They might have vehicles, yeah. So, I mean, it's not gonna have a major impact, but I think that it's consistent with what we wanted.
Yeah, I
As
was
an
wondering what
oversight.
other vehicles it could be other than the sheriff's. Because the
Yeah.
county, no,
As
Not
far
that
as I
mine
know,
knows,
that's what you've got now, but this would also contemplate in the future if we went in the direction of the Midwest and made our counties our
Animal studies.
main sources of regional government, they would still be covered. So, The second instance of amendment strikes out the study section and puts a new study section in. The main changes here is you'll notice that it refers to motor vehicles generally in the title rather than used motor vehicles. And the reason for this is if you look down in the powers and duties on page 3 of the amendment, they've also added examination of the assessment of purchase and use tax on vehicles that were first purchased and first registered in another state prior to the owner moving to Vermont and registering the vehicle here, including any potential impacts that the current manner in which the tax is assessed might have on owners' decisions to move to Vermont or to register their vehicles here. And then the second is potential changes to the statutes and rules that could mitigate any negative impacts that were identified pursuant to that subsection.
So you did this as a strike all?
Just for that section. So I
Okay.
struck that section in its entirety and replaced the language is essentially the same.
Is there a way to do this just as an amendment to the bill and this language? So we just show the members of the Senate just what we're changing in this, because if you send this all out, they're going to read the whole thing. And I would rather say we're just doing EV and we're just doing the section
So
3.
you'll end up with about a dozen instances of amendment for section 43 or a half a dozen. So that was why I chose to strike the section out, because otherwise it's amending the title, it's amending the reader assistance heading, it's amending the description of what the committee does, and then it's adding in 2 new powers and duties and renumbering the remaining powers and duties. And then it does leave the rest of it alone. So maybe that's 5, 6 instances of amendment. If that's okay.
Fine.
Okay, I can do that. I'll need a few minutes to get that through and then get it.
Because the more complicated it looks, when we go to the floor, the more difficulty we're gonna have. We're only really adding 2 small pieces. Go ahead.
I do think folks seeing like many different instances of amendment might be just as confusing.
Well, you get what we're trying to do in here.
I think it is small. I think we can explain it as this.
I think we can too, but
I understand what you're saying, but based on the amendment situation that happened with.
can you draft it both ways and we'll
I
take a
can,
choice.
I'm putting that together now, so.
Perfect. We'll take a look at it.
I'm happy to explain it if.
My question is, now we've had it explained. Are we all good with this?
Yes.
All 5 of us?
Oh, yeah, I'm clear.
Yes,
Andrew?
Andrew?
I think so. I wanted to, I was trying to really quickly look at the wording about the study on the diagnostic light, but if that needs to be changed, those folks in the house didn't clarify that.
So what that basically says is, look at the onboard diagnostic light failure requirements. And if there are instances where the onboard diagnostic light is coming on, but it's not actually a safety issue, not failing the car because the light is on, instead determining whether there's a safety issue. So this would be instances where the light hasn't been reset because we took it to a mechanic that didn't run in the reset code, or the light is coming on for a non-critical issue in the car. And I think that's going to depend based on the actual on the
If you
actual
look
model
in
of the
if you
vehicle.
look in the inspection manual for onboard diagnostic, malfunction, that term doesn't appear. So that's my question was, does it really match up with the manual? Because there is the onboard diagnostic test, but that's just for the emissions. So are we talking about that light being
Hold on
on?
a second.
I just wanted to make sure that it's clear what it is and then lined up with wording in the manual.
Just give me 2 seconds. I'm pulling it on.
This speaks to safety. Safety only.
Except this section over here.
Sound true? I think.
I gave it on this one.
Thank you. I have a request
Looking at
from,
the
from the corner
power
office.
students of the study group,
It's hard to see them.
the study of the assessment. The inspection of motor vehicles whose onboard diagnostic indicator light on.
It's actually called the malfunction indicator lamp in there, so I can change that term.
Right. But that, isn't that just about the emissions test?
Yeah, let me just see. if It shows up outside of the emissions test.
My understanding here, it's not.
I'm also seeing
Lighted
folks
power.
leaning forward over here as if they may have something to say, so.
The way I look at the manual,
So I'm
the
seeing,
lights on, it's only, because you'd only failed the emissions test, not the
and
inspection.
that's not correct. So the malfunction lamp shows up with respect to things like the ABS system. If that's on for the ABS system, you have to fail. I have not done a comprehensive check of the entire
Well, that's the
inspection
ABS.
manual.
That's the specific ABS mount malfunction indicator light.
Right, so,
I think if we wanted to look at the ABS indicator light, we'd have to say ABS indicator light, or a wording that says like all malfunction lights.
so those are the only malfunction lamp indications that I see here.
Right, well, that's kind of my point, is that it seems like people are under the assumption that if there is a warning light, like check engine light, that you will fail inspection. My understanding is the inspection manual says you shouldn't fail the inspection of just the engine light.
To that point, Senator First, like, I think this was not a change made by the amendment, but rather something that was originally in what we passed.
Oh.
And I
agree.
And I had also maybe articulated some of those concerns, but it sounded like this was a issue that has been flagged by different constituents that, I think we could workshop the wording, but,
Right.
I'm kind of taking this as a great opportunity for DMV to come and give us some updated info because
That's, again, I think the reason that, we staved off any push to change, in the immediate is information coming back to have a discussion where we all, would be a better.
Well, I totally agree. If we don't have the wording right, they could say like, well, we looked at this wording and it didn't make sense, so we didn't do that.
I suspect the House will have
All right, and I'm
some
okay.
changes, and so going forward,
I mean, I'm saying-
this will be not the last time we look at this word.
Yeah, and I'm not, I just remembered I was gonna look at that before we voted on, I forgot. So you gave me another chance to bring it.
Are we all set with the primary changes that Senator Baruch and Senator Harrison brought up?
Yes,
Okay,
I think that was you just made a great case for why you only want the 2 amendments only in there.
yes,
I mean, it's a good
Yes.
point, but
Yeah.
that's, I only want to show what we're changing.
right. Okay.
Okay,
I
we're
will
gonna
get
take,
a third version up for you.
we're
I'll
gonna
try to
take a
come back before
5-minute
lunch.
break,
Thank you.
and then we're gonna come